Well, good evening, printing enthusiasts. Thank you for joining us for another episode of How Would You Slice That? If you're new to the show, on Tuesdays that are prime numbers, we stream live and we try to balance a little bit of community time, getting to know somebody in the community, and also try to weave in maybe some slicer tips or ways of thinking about making your model or your print real. My name is Vicki Sola, and my co-host here is Dr. Lawrence Nightingale, and we're both hailing to you from Virginia. How are you doing, Lawrence?
Doing great, Vicki. Doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great. I have one more custom model to finish before the holiday season, so I'm feeling good.
Oh wow. Okay, good. That's great. That is great. I've been thinking a lot about holiday decorations lately. Not custom. So can I share some with you?
Oh, sure, of course.
You know, I pretty much printed my whole entire Christmas tree ornaments last year. So this is one of those nifty string ornaments with no infill. I printed just
With
yesterday. Yeah, and then I've got my daughter's teacher has a dog, so it's a little dog snowflake. You know, anything for try to get over that B+ threshold. You know, whatever it takes. And this is a Christmas mandala, flat, simple, and decorative. And then the slicer on for Bamboo, they kind of have added for Bamboo Studio, they've added some pretty dynamic capabilities that I just discovered. Like, so this one is a bluey, right? But you can customize the message by just typing in the slicer. So that was cool. And then my daughter is crazy about cats. And I saw this picture, this ornament, and it was so sweet that my blood sugar went up. I'm diabetic now, but this is the cat ornament that I printed for my daughter.
And so, does she know about it yet?
Yeah, I showed it to her. Okay. Yeah. So
That's
she definitely gave all the oohs and ahs over that one too. She was pretty taken by that one as well. So yeah, that's what I've been doing this weekend. That's what
since we're talking about ornaments, how did your ornament sale go?
You know what? Actually, it went really, really well. We set another record for fundraising, and then the students were so kind of like energized by the sale thing that like we had the sale for about 3 hours, and then the next day they went back around all over campus and sold pretty much all the rest of the ornaments. So it went very, very well.
For anyone who missed previous episodes, Lawrence works with Northern Virginia Community College, and they do a 3D printed Christmas ornament fundraiser to raise money for their innovation lab.
That's right. That was right. Yeah, and it's a great tradition. The students get involved with it, and what's great about it is that it really obligates everybody in the club to at least try and print their own ornaments. Single color, multicolor. I kind of the tradition with the club has always been to see if you can't. We did a lot of kind of youth indexed ornaments. So think of Pokémon and Yu-Gi-Oh, and throw in a little bit of Disney there too. And that was the selection that we had. It was
I don't think he's watching, but I'm working on a Skippity toilet ornament for my oldest son. So I'm gonna sneak it on the tree and see if he finds
awesome.
it.
Awesome. Well, he'll love that. Yeah. How about you? What have you been? How was your holiday?
Oh, good holiday. Yep. Yeah. And got some 3D modeling time, and I've been doing a lot of little buildings, a lot of custom requests for wedding venues or gazebos and stuff like that. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, I just got one more left.
Okay. So. And which platform are you producing them on? Are you producing them on?
I'm Blender.
No, I'm saying though, like which unit are you printing them on?
I don't mean to ignore my other printers. I really don't. But everything's been Bamboo Mini.
Yeah. And I'll say this one thing before we bring on our guests, because I'm really excited about it. The other thing I've been doing over the weekend is answering people's questions who have just bought a Bamboo. I've never 3D printed before. What should I do? What should I buy before? Should I do X? Should I do Y? the biggest questions that I've seen are, what happens? Why are my prints not sticking, right? And so I guess Bamboo has told the world, just wash your plate off and put it back in, make sure it's dry, maybe use a little isopropyl alcohol, and it'll stick. And I have never had success doing that. So I've been making plugs for hairspray and bed adhesive a lot over the weekend. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be developing in the next 6 months. I bet that the number of new people with 3D printing is going to come close to the number of people who have been in 3D printing for the past decade. I think people who have been 3D printing for a while, we're going to find ourselves in a much bigger pool in the next 6 months or so.
I agreed. And I am uplifted. I like that you're there answering those questions, because I do see some, I'm in a woman's 3D printing group, and they don't feel especially comfortable in the Bamboo groups. They say that there's a lot of abrasiveness when you're asking questions. So I'm glad that there is a welcoming 3D printing ambassador in those groups answering questions, which is a segue to our guest, because our guest tonight is one of my very first 3D printing ambassadors, one of the first people that I have met in the 3D printing space. And over the years, he has proven time and time again to be a great ambassador for all the best parts of our community. He is kind, he is supportive, he has an infectious curiosity and even more infectious positive nature. And on top of all that, he manages to be pretty darn talented as well. He first started with additive manufacturing well before me and Lawrence in 2012. And since then, he's printed models in a variety of materials, including Shapeways ceramics, rubber-like resin, and CocoaPress chocolate, what I'm most jealous of. The projects he takes on are as varied as the materials. He's done fun things like a Pokémon Go accessory that went viral in 2016. It got at least 6 million views on Facebook. He's taken on technical projects like turning a 3D printer into a 2D printer with a custom design toolhead. He's shared coding projects, he can code too, that let you twist your STLs or turn them into ASCII art. He's experimented, and mommy has made a noob error. I forgot to close my door, but here we go. He's experimented with converting gCode back into STLs and using ChatGPT to 3D model. And he also seems to have a special affection for printing himself. He's turned a 3D scan of himself into a pen holder. He's printed his face to see if he could trick his phone's FaceID. He's even printed a life-size 1-to-1 scale version of his own brain. He's written articles for 3D With Us, Tom's Hardware, and Make Magazine. And as you might expect, his work has been highlighted by numerous places, including 3dprint.com, Hackaday, HotMakes, and check Hellebuyck's Filament Friday. So we are welcoming one of my first 3D printing ambassadors, and I think who should be everybody's 3D printing ambassador, Mr. Andrew Sink. Hello.
Hey, how's it going? That was a heck of an intro. I felt my head was just doing this the entire time.
Well, here's an interesting little tidbit about that intro. A lot of stuff didn't make it in. Like, there's so much to you. Like, we didn't talk about his business 3D Central, or your work with carbon, or resin laps, right? Or your affection for frogs, or how you used to be into weightlifting, or how you like bodybuilding, or how you like NoFX. There's a lot of stuff that we can talk about tonight.
Yeah, great. And I look forward to diving in a little bit. Yeah, it's funny. Some of these projects are they're moments of very intense focus for me. Things like converting gCode back into an STL, and I'll get hyper fixated for like a week or two. And then I'll do all this work and then publish it and then sort of forget. And then like 5 years later, like, oh yeah, I worked on this thing. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about 3D scanning. I feel like it's a great counterpart to 3D printing that doesn't really get as much press, but maybe that's changing. And excited to talk a little bit and talk about, what everyone in the community's been up to.
Yeah. So
I think, Lawrence, you like always to start off with here how they discovered 3D printing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Andrew, my story is different. I saw a documentary and saw a 3D printer in a documentary and said I got to have one. But how did you learn about 3D printing.
I will tell you all about it as soon as I hear what documentary you saw, because I'm very curious to hear about a documentary that has 3D printing. I want to make sure I've seen it.
Oh, it was actually on evolution, right? And so some scientists at Princeton, they took several variables like movement and distance and getting nutrients and stuff like that, and they programmed it into a computer, and they told the computer that you are now a predator and you have to survive. And so it sent these variables through 1,000 iterations of evolution, and the computer printed out or composed a digital organism. And that digital organism they then put into a FDM printer, and they said, "Oh, this is a 3D printer. You can make one for about $1,000 with parts from Home Depot." And I was like, "What? A machine that'll make anything for $1,000? I got to have it." And so the documentary was not about 3D printing. 3D printing was a tool to kind of show the work of the scientists, and that was on. It was on it was on PBS. It was on PBS, and I can't tell you what the name of the show was, but
that's awesome. No, I'm always curious to hear about the stuff, because 3D printing, it pops up in very strange places. So for me, when I was a kid, my mom bought me a book by Michael Crichton called Timeline. Fantastic book. Highly recommend everybody read it. Definitely worth the investment. They also made a movie with Paul Walker. Skip the movie. Do not watch the movie. Get the book. And it had this concept in it where these researchers were sending things back and forth between spaces, where they would sort of deconstruct something down into digital code, and then on the other side, you would reconstruct it. And it was a very sci-fi sort of it's like a replicator from Star Trek, which I didn't watch, but I really latched onto it, and then completely forgot about it. Went through high school, college, and I was taking a class in SolidWorks, and we were doing some 3D modeling, and it wasn't really resonating with me. I was designing parts and making things, and it was fun, but it didn't have I wasn't having that sort of instant gratification you get from doing things like playing music, which was my major before I switched. I had originally studied music theory, which is very easy to get instant gratification.
Yes, it is.
An upright bass and makes noise. And so the SolidWorks class I was taking, we were making 3D models, and the professor said, "Oh, by the way, there's a 3D printer in our engineering lab, and if you want to use it, you can send your SolidWorks files to that printer and make your part." And it was this instant, oh my gosh, that's the thing. That's the thing that I want. And so it was immediately, this was in 2011 or 2012. And I used it as a Stratasys U-print. So it was a larger, more industrial printer that we had at school. And I just immediately fell in love with it. I just started printing as much as they would let me. And then very similar to you, I bought a kit printer for home, which was, I actually went to Home Depot to have a piece of glass cut for the print bed, because the printer bot, which those are old sort of, all wooden printers, worked great. It was a nice machine, but I couldn't get anything to stick to the bed. And so you're printing on the plywood, and someone said, "Oh, use tape." I tried tape, try hairspray. And then eventually someone said, "Oh, you need to print on glass, because that's what Ultimaker and some of these more expensive machines use." And so it's like, okay, we'll go to Home Depot, get a piece of glass cut. Things have gotten
that's what they used to cut glass, but
yeah, things have gotten easier in the consumer space, haven't they? As I'm saying this out loud, I'm imagining on the Bamboo group, right, trying to explain to somebody "Oh, first you have to cut a piece of glass."
I don't have scissors that'll do that.
Hey, a quick question: have either of you seen a movie called Small Soldiers? Someone in chat, Dom, is saying that that's the first time he saw 3D printing. I never saw that movie.
I have seen that movie, but I have to go back and check it out, because that movie is well before 3D printing got into my kind of consciousness. So it's possible that I saw it, consumed it, and it just kind of went over my head that time. But I'll have to go back and check it out. There was
also a 3D printer. So Small Soldiers, luckily you only have to watch the first 2 minutes of the movie, because it's how the movie starts. They actually it's an old 3D Systems, it's an SLA machine. I don't think it's a Viper. It's an old 3D Systems machine where it's a vat of resin, and you're sort of shining the laser from above. So it's a top-down resin printer, and they have a full model, and it sort of rises out of the vat. It looks really, you're watching it. You're with 3D printers, you're watching it, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like Terminator. This is incredible. But it's the same thing with Jurassic Park. Someone told me that there's a 3D printer, I think in Jurassic Park 2. And I was like, really? I had no idea. And I went back and rewatched it, and sure enough, in one of the opening scenes, they 3D print a Velociraptor's trachea, and they kind of blow into it. It makes a noise. But if you pause it, it's like very clearly like a Mendel or something. Like it's an old RepRap 3D printer. And it's like right there.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
In Jurassic Park, right under our noses.
Yeah, well, we ought to start a 3D printer IMDb.
I know it's whenever they show up in movies, I always have to pause it and then point it out to my wife. And I'm like, that's a 3D printer. That's a thing. Right. We were watching a movie with Keanu Reeves recently where he plays an architect, and there was like a 3D printer in the background that was printing. Mm-hmm. I had to pause it, like zoom in, walk up to the TV, get real close to see if I could recognize what it was. It's always, for me, it's such an Easter egg. It's so cool to see them out in the wild.
Absolutely. I mean, anytime they have like a technical space or like even a medical space or these detective shows and stuff like that, you go into the technical spaces and they got them in the background somewhere lots and lots and lots of times. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to see them. It's fun to spot them. I think the last time the times that I think about 3D printing the most is actually when the Star Trek movies use their fabricators and print out, or make replicators and make burgers and all that stuff like that.
Did you ever get into Star Trek at all, Andrew?
I did. I got really into Star Trek a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And right around like COVID, I started watching Voyager, which felt to me like it was basically like Mad Max, the TV show. And so I just kind of like watched it. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're just like going through a wasteland for like 7 seasons. And I loved Voyager, so I had to go Deep Space Nine, and then you have to like work your way through. But I was very late into Star Trek, and so the replicator as a concept, when I saw it again, it's that same feeling of like, oh yeah, no, it's like a 3D printer. We're just sort of we haven't quite figured out the like any output thing yet.
Yes,
get in there.
Reading the mind part, that's the other part too. That always fascinated me.
So I got into 3D printing, and then I wanted to continue getting involved. At the time, I worked in an R&D lab for a company that made electrical terminals when I was in college, and I started to see the practical applications immediately. Like fixtures for UL testing. It became very clear that instead of having to fabricate this or send it to a machine shop, I can sketch up like 80% of the drawing, and then I'll have it in my hand, a couple hours later. Very, very clear business justification. Mm-hmm. And I just saw it across every industry. Like it was very much an anything machine. And I still, 13 years later or something, like when a printer's going, I'll always watch the first layer. I'm still like fascinated by it. And I still have that sense of like, my gosh, this is such a crazy idea. Like you can do something digital and make it real.
It's that's the part that I've always been really kind of amazed by too, or really when I talk to people about it, like it's a machine that makes any idea that you've got pretty much a real object, like it was in your head like 10 minutes ago, and now here it is, a real thing. And so I don't think that people who are not into 3D printing really get it that much. I think that lots of times people think of it as this super technical pursuit. I think that's also why a lot of beginners have trouble too, is because they think that you need to know a whole heck of a lot in order to do it, and you really, really don't. You really just gotta allow for yourself to take the steps and explore the space using the machines and mess up a few times too, which is part of the deal.
And I think that's also partially due to the consumer space, especially something we can talk about is that in the consumer space, it's just gotten a lot easier, and it was not. One of the biggest barriers to entry in 3D printing, in my opinion, has always been software. Like the 3D printers, it's a hot glue gun tied to an Etch-a-Sketch. Like we've pretty much nailed it down at this point.
I've used the hot glue gun analogy before, but not the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yes.
I mean, it's basically, it's a hot glue gun and Etch-a-Sketch. And so like we've made advancements in how precisely we can control. We have the ability to, remember our position when the power is out so we can resume from a certain point. Like we have feedback on the servos so we understand if something's not working. Like, so the Etch-a-Sketch has gotten better over time, but it still requires that input. And that's where I think that's a really hard barrier initially, like because you have to learn CAD, and historically CAD has not been something that you could easily pick up. And now, especially with 3D scanning, the barriers to entry are just very, very low. You have printers that if you hit auto-generate support, you can feel fairly confident the part's going to print regardless of orientation or placement or anything like that. And so you couple that with 3D scanning, where you have a model that doesn't really have like an intuitive flat surface. And between those two things, like you have someone who doesn't have, an engineering background, they can just take something that they found, 3D scan it, and then print it, and that's it.
And then you're off to the races, and you can solve a problem, or you can fix a part, or you can make something new that nobody's ever seen before. And it's interesting, Andrew, that you talk about the barrier to entry being design. I personally am not that kind of 3D printer. I am more than happy to let someone else's design exist on my machine. Like I might be able to count on one hand the number of things I've designed myself that I've actually printed. So I've always been a low barrier entry guy. Like even when you go back to like 2017 Thingiverse was incredibly stale after about 5 or 6 years. But like you can start out with like 20,000, 30,000 designs. So I think that you're right that design and CAD are ways to turn 3D printing into a tool. However, if you want, I've got in my house right now, I've got lampshades, and I've got Christmas ornaments, and I've got door stops. And you know what? Maybe you burn through a couple of door stops, and you can think about how bad the design was, and then print another one, and maybe think about designing later. But I hear you on the. I think that what is happening though is that design is getting a little bit more, like you're saying, it's getting easier and easier and easier to understand. And I think you've explored with. Well, tell us how you decided to explore with ChatGPT and 3D printing, because that's everybody. It does the dirty work for us. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about ChatGPT. I think your Thingiverse analogy was great, by the way. I think that's it. To me, it always felt like printing 3D models downloading 3D models has always felt like clip art. So there used to be stock libraries of images that you would sort of download to print if you wanted to add something, like add some color to a document, and you didn't want to, go out and license a photo or something. So clip art were sort of stock images, and they're great. You can get a clip art of like a frog wearing a cowboy hat, but as soon as you say, I actually want that cowboy hat to be a crown, it's like that's where it's an insurmountable challenge to a beginner, because you don't know how to design it, you don't know how to go back and change it, you don't know how to modify it, and so that initial print will get you to a place where you're comfortable with the hardware, and that's where the software comes in. So let's talk about ChatGPT, because ChatGPT, I did not come from a software engineering background, so ChatGPT was not something that was really on my radar initially. And so when ChatGPT rolled out in November of, I guess, 2 years ago, I was actually sitting, so I was sitting in an airport, like kind of playing with it, and like I was not really sure what I was doing. And I realized that, oh my gosh, I wonder if it could make a 3D model. And so I asked ChatGPT, and you're seeing the video right now, I asked ChatGPT to make a 3D model of a cube, and it spit out a serviceable STL file. And so I was looking at it and realizing, oh, I wonder if it could actually make anything more than a cube. I wonder if it could make a cube generator. Could it write code that makes an infinite number of cubes? And sure enough, this is like a recurring theme with me between ChatGPT and CocoaPress. Both are experiences I had in an airport where I almost missed a flight because I got so wrapped up in what I was doing. And with ChatGPT, I just got sucked into it. And so I was immediately, I sort of intuitively understood this is like looking at, an early draft of what we're going to be working on. So you're looking at a cube right now made by ChatGPT, a while ago now. And it's got all kinds of problems. The normals are flipped, meaning the triangles are facing the wrong direction, which is a thing that can happen in 3D modeling. Missing a triangle originally on the bottom. So it was sort of kind of like a rough draft. It was an attempt at a cube. But it was very clear that there was something there. And it wasn't perfect, but it was a pretty good start. I still use ChatGPT pretty regularly, especially in the context of 3D modeling. It is a surprisingly useful tool.
Wow. Okay. I would definitely be finding myself taking a look at that.
And you should. And I, it's just like any 3D modeling or any CAD or any, anything that you're exploring. It means something different to everybody. So when you're looking at ChatGPT, I think there's this initial, for me, when I would tell people that, I just use ChatGPT to make a 3D model, there's this thinking like, oh, well, so is it a fully fleshed 3D model? Did it make a car with a windshield and doors and like working parts? And you have to kind of you can ask ChatGPT to make a car, and it'll give you like a rectangle with 2 cylinders for headlights. Like, it'll do its best. But it's not really what it's meant for. It's not the right tool for that job. But if you need 100 versions of a 3D model that all have some slight difference, you need to scale something, a certain amount for a test. ChatGPT will write you a Python script, and you are moving in minutes, where it would be a fairly manual task otherwise.
Right. Which is where the strength of ChatGPT is, the heavy manual work. I say heavy manual, time-consuming manual changes, small changes. It's very, very good at that. But yeah, I wouldn't want to drive in a car that ChatGPT designs.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've read there's like people who are uploading their stacks of MRI like DICOM data to ChatGPT and asking for a diagnosis. Might be a good idea, but also probably not in all likelihood. I used ChatGPT a while ago. I had a light out in my neighborhood, a street light, and I asked ChatGPT, "Hey, can you write like a letter that I can just like send to the city and to have somebody come out and look at this because it's been out for a while?" And so ChatGPT wrote this very nice looking letter that said, like, here's the statute that says the city must maintain the lights and and it goes down. And then I was like, oh, it actually cites a source. Like, it cites like a city ordinance. And so I clicked it and I was like, what is this? And I looked it up, and it was related to the density of burial plots and cemeteries within the city. And so it was like, you read it, you're like, and you could easily think like, oh yeah, this is a very nice looking document. And the second you sort of zoom in, you're like, oh, this is actually, there's problems here.
Right. But you'll it's a good attention getter, and you save 10 minutes writing that letter for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's ChatGPT is it's a useful tool. I use it as a tool. I get a lot of use out of it. I think I pay $20 a month for it, worth every penny. But it's also, I would never use it to design a 3D model from scratch right now. Maybe 10 years we can see where we're at.
Good stuff.
Andrew, I have an unusual request. Would you mind standing up so they can see your shirt?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am wearing a shirt from the Nova Maker Faire, and this is a Maker Faire that I went to back in, where does it have the date? Here it is, 2014.
Yeah.
And so this was, I actually had to dig through the t-shirt archive to find this. I would, every Maker Faire that I went to, and I went to a lot of them, I would always buy a t-shirt because I wanted something to hold on to. And so I have stacks of these from Maker Fairs. And this was a fun one because, Vicky, you and I met at a Nova Mini Maker Faire.
Yeah, Nova Mini Maker Faire. And that's where I walked in with a little bit of imposter syndrome, and you and Matt Gorton and Tim Paris made sure that I felt welcome.
Yeah, of course. I remember seeing your Creality. You had an Ender 3. I think I saw it either that year or a year later. And I was like, it was like it came out of space. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a printer not made of wood. This is amazing.
I think you're thinking Maker Gear.
Oh, the Maker Gear. Sorry, you're right.
But you had the confidence of ChatGPT quoting the wrong ordinance.
I did. Yeah, 100%. I'm like, it's all in the confidence. Yeah, you had a Maker Gear, and it's a 3D printer not made of wood. It was a fascinating thing.
Yeah, yes. And that unit, that printer is a supreme printer. Like until some serious developments came around 3D printing, the Maker Gear I think was top-notch unit for pretty much anybody to have for a good 5 or 6 years running.
Oh yeah, when the 3D Hubs did their printer, their printer rankings, it was consistently highly ranked.
Yeah, for good reason.
So, and I do have a picture of our first. No, I'm not in it. I took it, but that's young Andrew Sink at Nova Mini Maker Faire 2015.
That's awesome.
That's funny. Yeah, it's a real trip down memory lane. So seeing a lot of this, the fun part for me is just seeing how far the technology's come, right? And looking at some of these machines and seeing that I feel like now we're really lucky. We get to tackle new and different problems instead of like the common problem. I think then was probably, if you ask somebody, what's the biggest issue in 3D printing? It was probably bed adhesion or, like print time being really slow or, silent stepper drivers weren't around yet. So like you had to have the printer really far away from you if you were on a call. And so now we're sort of dealing with problems like if I have a multicolor print on a Bamboo machine or a Prusa with an MMU, like how do I minimize the amount of purge material, between colors, which is trying to explain that to somebody then would be a fun conversation.
Right. We've come a long way. I had a student that was very, very bright. Dennis Kuroshenko that worked for me. And I was like, Dennis, you you're an IT major and you're getting ready to, you know how to code and things like that. And the community had probably about 80% of the code together for doing 2-color printing, but Dennis could not get our single color printers to stop, change filament, and then keep moving forward. And he worked on it for an entire year, and then, for an obscenely low amount of money. And then I'll tell you what. I'll give you one more example. I convinced, I shouldn't have done this, but I convinced one of my colleagues to get a rail core. Well, rail core is always a good idea. I convinced my colleague to get a rail core, and then to get the color mixer. Now I'm blanking on the brand. It's
tool changer or something like that.
It wasn't a tool changer. No, it spliced the filament together.
Oh, like a mosaic.
Yes, he got a mosaic too, right? So I started out with mosaic 1, and I had a couple of rail cores. He got the mosaic 2 and the rail core with better rails and everything. I was like, oh, this guy's got it sewn up. He was going to start printing out atoms represented by different colors. Like carbon is one color, oxygen's another, hydrogen and helium, for chemistry, to help students learn chemistry. Well, he banged his head against the wall for about a year and a half, and then I showed up with my Bamboo, with the AMS, and I recently put my students on to the responsibility of printing out the files that he sent us that were multicolor for chemistry. I just handed them 10 of them. He's been working on it for 2 years. So things progress, and what used to be tremendous problems are making themselves, or laying themselves down and giving us space to do things like scan artifacts and make things that have been not available to us for such a very, very long time. And tell us about your scanning hijinks and how it got started.
Yeah, that was a very smooth segue. It's funny, as we're talking, I'm realizing, hey, we're halfway through, and I don't think I've talked about 3D scanning yet. I should probably do that at some point.
Time always goes really fast on these.
Yeah, of course. It's very easy to talk about, all this historical stuff. But yeah, let's be forward thinking. Let's talk about what I'm seeing and what I'm excited about, and kind of where I want to go. And that's talking about 3D scanning. So 3D scanning has been a really interesting thing for me to be involved with, because it's such a counterpart to 3D printing. It's such a clear cooperative technology. It works very well, but 3D scanning also, it suffers from a lot of the same problems as 3D printing in terms of vocabulary, and that the users, like most consumers and most hobbyists, don't have that vocabulary in the same way that we have developed for 3D printing. We know what words like adhesion mean. We know what words like delamination mean. Like this, we've sort of developed this intuitive understanding in our heads of 3D printing. But with 3D scanning, it's a little different. Because if you ask 10 different people what a 3D scanner does, you're going to get 10 different answers. Whereas now with a 3D printer, you'll pretty much get the same answer, which is people will say, oh, it makes stuff out of plastic. Yeah, that's pretty close. You nailed it.
Fair enough. Oh, yeah.
So with 3D scanning, we have all of these different types of 3D scanners. We have metrology 3D scanners that are used in factory automation as part of quality control processes, which are very expensive. We have CT scanners, which scan your brain or your bones when you go to the hospital and turn it into usable 3D data. And then we have photogrammetry-based 3D scanning software where you just take a bunch of pictures and throw it into an app, and then you get a model out of it. And that last one has been really exciting for me for a while now. And I've been really involved in photogrammetry because I think it's a really accessible and easy way to generate 3D models.
Hugely easy. Oh my gosh, there we go.
Oh, here you go. So this is a video that I did with Polycam back in 2021, I think. It's showing kind of the basics of how it works. Like you turn your phone on, and I have the same phone. I've had the same phone forever. I should upgrade at some point. I actually bought this phone because it had a LiDAR sensor, which I was really excited about. But here what we're doing is we're just taking pictures. And so we're just basically making a stack of images that we are going to then stitch together to create a 3D model. And the way that photogrammetry works is anywhere where we're able to take a picture of something, anywhere that resolves in the camera, gets included in the 3D model, which can be good and bad depending on what you're hoping to 3D scan. And so this is a pretty good example of a medium detail object, at a fairly close distance. This is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a lot.
You can see I'm subscribed to your station.
Great. And so here we're scanning something that's not super shiny. It's maybe a little too shiny, but it's okay. And then we're going to create a 3D model out of it. And so this photogrammetry process, the reason that it's so appealing to me and the reason that I like it so much is it's so straightforward. All you need is a camera. And, it's sort of like that saying, like, the best camera is the one you have in your pocket, or the one you have with you. And with photogrammetry, so here's a great example. So we have a question from someone watching right now. Don't you need a camera with LiDAR for photogrammetry? So LiDAR scanning and photogrammetry are actually two different things. They can be used in cooperation to add color texture, but generally speaking, a LiDAR scan, you're using distance to create a 3D model. So you're basically sending out a little bit of light, measuring the time it takes to return, and that's how you generate a point cloud. That's how you're creating your 3D model. Photogrammetry works by taking a stack of photos and stitching them together. So you actually don't need LiDAR to do photogrammetry. You can do photogrammetry with a Game Boy camera if you stack up enough pictures, as opposed to LiDAR, which is typically used for big areas with lots of information. So if you want to scan a room, or if you want to walk down a hallway and scan the entire thing as you go, that's a great application for LiDAR. Not a lot of detail, but very large mesh size.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Andrew, because my first experience with scanning, I guess, was a LiDAR scan. Somehow, working with the students at Nova, we stumbled across a software program that was not open source, but you could get it for free, and you used an
Xbox
Connect scanner. Yes. And so we scanned a whole bunch of kids in a summer camp and produced their busts. We produced like 20 busts of people that we had scanned. And what's crazy about it is that, like, the free version of the software, you could only get 10,000 pixels, right? But then if you paid $60, you could get millions of pixels. And so I was like, look, I know it's $60. Is it going to work? I have no idea, but it's supposed to be better. So we put the $60 down, and it worked amazingly. So my experience with scanning is more LiDAR scanning, and but in a world where we're not worried about color, it worked really, really well.
Yeah, of course, because color, texture, and geometry data are two different things as well. So when you're making a 3D model, you're typically looking at, there's sort of two things that you can capture among other. There's two main things. You're looking at the geometry, which is how many triangles are in this model, how detailed is this model, and then there's the color texture, and the color texture for me has always been a difficult one, because color is such a subjective thing, and it's a lot harder to accurately reproduce color on a 3D model, because when you're walking around something, especially if you have a light source, or you're casting a shadow or something, the light changes as you're going. A picture, you have one lighting setup, and that's it. And with a 3D scan, it can be, even if you're scanning something large and the sun is moving throughout the day, it's changing where the shadows are on the part. It can be a little tricky. But those Xbox Connect scanners were a ton of fun. I remember when those came out. I had one that by a company called ASCII that you would basically tape to an iPad, and it would sort of let you take your Xbox on the go. And I made a bunch of scans with that. It was a very, very interesting piece of technology, but much more accessible. You didn't need prohibitively expensive software. The workflow is really straightforward, and like printing a bust of somebody is so easy. Like, you just support the chin, and you are done. The thing's gonna look great.
Yeah. And we stumbled upon that solution. Honestly, it was okay. What can we fit onto the plate? We've only got 2 days to print everybody. What are we gonna do? And busts are what we came up with. But it's interesting though, with the LiDAR, we were actually able to capture people's texture of their hair. So you talk about texture and color, and I was concerned about the texture of the hair too. But it came out quite well. So
yeah, hair is tough. Hair is tough in video games. If you ever played a video game where you've seen somebody with like badly modeled hair, and it's like it just like shifts in the wind, right? Like not attached to the head. Hair is tough in 3D models. Like hair is a difficult thing to model. It's a difficult thing to scan. For a long time, I would just tell people to wear a hat if at all possible,
right?
Or just sort of like cut the Gordian knot, right? Like do something with your hair, like put something over your hair, especially if you have like dark hair like me. It can be a little bit harder. It can be tricky.
Yeah,
especially for color texture, right? It's difficult for the scanner to understand, is this a void, is this a shadow, or is this like a lock of hair?
Right. Absolutely. And so the scan, and so also one of the things that really attracted me to 3D printing when I first got into it was the fact that you could scan and then possess in your own home like ancient artifacts. So one of the first things that really twisted me into the practice of 3D printing, like made me obsessed and put me in position that I absolutely had to have it, was the Nike of salmon thrace. Do you remember that one?
The what?
Nike of salmon thrace. Nike.
With the wing, right?
With the wing, yes, with the wings. That's right. And there was one woman that went and she scanned the Louvre a couple years before everybody kind of really got into 3D printing. Like somehow she's a graduate student or something like that, and I've forgotten her name at this point in time. But the same person scanned the Nike of salmon thrace, and they also scanned the Venus de Milo and a couple other antiquities.
So I think you're thinking of Cosmo Wenman, who's done a lot of 3D scanning. Yeah, so he's done a lot. Yeah, exactly. So he's done a lot, especially with Rodin sculptures, which are a very...
I haven't seen any of his Rodin sculptures. Otherwise, I'd have one.
Oh, they're fantastic. And so he actually really inspired me. So last year, I went to the Rodin Museum in Paris specifically to do some 3D scanning. And I scanned
They let you do that.
And yes, because you're taking pictures, right? And so this is sort of like, this is back to the... if you show up to a museum with a backpack with a computer running and like a light source and like a light panel and stuff, like, probably gonna have questions. But if you're making a 3D scan, taking pictures, typically you don't really get asked any questions. You're no different than anybody else taking pictures.
Gotcha.
So it's funny that you say that, because this is actually, I think, what Vicky and I were talking about earlier before we had this scheduled. Mm-hmm. So I was in Germany a few weeks ago, and I 3D scanned a sculpture. And yeah, this is a little YouTube short that I put together showing the process. Mm-hmm. But it's a sculpture of Athena. And a couple of years ago, I was reading about Roman statues and how they used to be painted. And they're really vibrant. At least that's what they think, right? And so when you look at them now and you just see this blank marble, I've always kind of associated statues with this very, not drab, but very, hard aesthetic. And it occurred to me, I wonder if we could actually use 3D printing here to add some color back. And so that was a video where I took one of these models and then added some rainbow filament, painted it on the bamboo, right? Like just created or added the areas that I wanted to change colors, and created a 3D model that had that color. And this has led to, this has become, something where I'm really having a lot of fun with the different color combinations.
And you said you went to is it the same museum in Germany that has the Nefertiti bust?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, because, well, of course, you're familiar with that controversy that did develop about 7 or 8 years ago. Who really owns the bust of Nefertiti? Somebody actually, I think, had made a digital model and said it was a scan, but it wasn't actually so.
It's funny. I do remember that. I'm fuzzy on the details, but I do remember that the controversy was that someone had made a 3D model and claimed it was a scan, which I remember was a little strange. No, this was actually, somebody asked me about this statue recently, and they asked about the copyright status of it. And it's a really great question. Yeah. I don't have an intuitive answer other than the original sculptor. This was a bronze sculpture from Greece that was created in about 400 BC. And what I saw in the museum was a marble recreation from the 1st century AD, so 500 years later. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing it like 2 centuries later.
Yes.
So the original artist, unfortunately, is not here for me to ask questions about the copyright status of it. My assumption is that a lot of these, especially these older sculptures, it doesn't really get much more public domain than something that's 2,500 years old.
I understand exactly what you're saying from the perspective of public domain, but from my reading about the concept is that the museums that exist that charge people to come see those things are getting a little bent out of shape, or can get bent out of shape, because these are things that they use to get people to actually come in person. I personally feel like it is, if I can hold it in my hand, then maybe I'd be more interested in going rather than less. but everybody's got a different perspective. I think that that's also hugely complicated by the fact that many of these artifacts are not in the country of their origin either.
Sure.
And so I think that 3D printing actually can kind of help to maybe relieve some of that kind of that tension, you know, things that were taken under circumstances that were either through war or through, you know, profit taking or whatever. Restoring culture could be something that 3D printing could come back around to do. So yeah.
Yeah, and I hear the word sometimes in regards to 3D scanning, I'll hear the word preservation sometimes, like preserving something when it's 3D scanned. And I think documented is probably a better word. I think documented is a better word because you're not really prolonging the lifespan of the original part, but you are sort of saying, here's a point in time, and this is what it looked like then. And you're able to document that and see it over time in the same way you can see, you know, a black and white photo of a Roman sculpture that was taken 100 years ago, and you look at, you know, this you know, daguerreotype or whatever, and you're like, oh my gosh, it looks pretty much the same now, but there's a couple of extra scratches. You sort of documented that point in time.
I think the documentation, I think that is a huge asset for what we're allowed to being able to do with the technology. I definitely like that positioning that mentally that you're talking about.
Yeah, and so the color of these things was something that it was sort of, this is what jumped out at me, was like, I'd love to see what these look like with color. And so this turned into a whole thing where now I have printed out a couple different versions of these using some of these like gradient materials, but it also turned into like, I wonder what it would look like if I printed it with, you know, a single color transition, right?
Oh, wow.
Or printing it out with like a single color, just a different color. So this is like a cookie cat yellow material.
And that's what I wanted to know. Like, is this how do we who are looking at this and like, wow, I think I could use that? Where do we get that from? Off your things?
So I've actually I have the 3D model on printables, the printable one, the STL file. If you download this and try it out.
Wow.
And I have a high poly version of it that I'm working on right now. And then also the color version, I have a version with color texture on it. So basically as I saw it in the museum. And that was that's available on Sketchfab. And Sketchfab is a site where people upload 3D scans with color texture, with animation.
Yes, I've been on Sketchfab.
Yeah, Sketchfab has a lot of historical, you know, documentation on it. But it was purchased by a games company a few years ago, and they're moving more towards becoming a digital platform for, you know, selling models. So something I've been thinking about a lot lately is these color 3D scans. I'm not sure where their home is, because we have a home for 3D models. We have we have Maker World, we have Thingiverse. We have kind of a known home for these. But for models with color texture or things that we want to be able to share and interact with, it's not as easy an answer, I think. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I don't have an easy way to show you a color 3D model that you can interact with or download. And I'm curious to see what that's going to look like in a couple of years.
No, wow, yeah. I mean, I think that it's a couple of years is probably a little bit too long. I'd say I'm going to give it 12 months, because I feel like things are just accelerating. Like color as a variable in this practice. Like I've only had it available to me. Oh gosh, I guess it has been a year. It has been a year that I've had color available to me, but I think that the fact that color is now really part of like the DNA of 3D printing really means that we're going to wind up answering that question a little bit faster than I think, personally, I think, in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, there's a pretty good distinction. I don't have, again, this goes back to the building of vocabulary. I'm not sure that I have the right vocabulary for this yet, but there's a distinction in my mind between a color 3D model like this, where I actually just printed this earlier today. When you were talking about Christmas ornaments, it really kind of jumped out at me. I've got like a little frog who sits on a ledge, like an elf on a shelf kind of deal. But this is technically a color model, right? This was made with 4 different colors.
Yes.
But to me, this is a different kind of color model than something like a scan of myself that was printed on a machine that uses, you know, inkjet color. And so
that's organic color
model. But I don't think these two things don't exist in the same place to me. These are different types of 3D models.
Right. One is more like an animation and the other is like a photograph.
Yeah, one is a color texture, whereas one is a color model. I think maybe that might be the easiest way to think about it. But even the lines get blurred even further because now you have software like I've seen some of the new Bamboo updates where if you import a model with color texture, it will interpolate between the colors you have. So if you have black, white, and red, and you upload a model that's got some gray spots, it will try to figure out what filament to route to that specific area. And so you sort of digitally paint the part. And so it sort of blurs the line a bit between those two.
Right. Isn't there a I thought there was a key ring like option where you could import like a color map and paint an actual object. I thought I saw that.
We're talking about Bamboo Studio, where you can import in OBJ files with the material file. Yeah. I've found that where it'll give you, if the colors don't match, it'll give you additional colors that you can map in.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, which is, again, it's getting between those two. Like you have your color texture for an OBJ file, for instance, and then you have, like an STL that's been split into multiple bodies for different color. They're the same.
Two different things, yeah.
So Vicky mentioned something earlier that I want to come back to because my wife asks me this all the time. I have a collection of like 3D printed Andrew stuff. Like I have like a little color 3D print of myself. I recently had a 3D scan done where like I turned myself into like a pen holder. And so it's like a little 3D print where he just kind of holds your pen. And so I like struck a pose, right?
Which, hey, anybody watching, you can print Andrew for your pen holder too. I'll put the link into chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, you can. And a few people on Printables have. I've seen a few pictures of people like of me on their desk holding a pen, and it's like, great, awesome, glad I could help. So something that you mentioned is like you have kind of a lot of scans of yourself, and my wife has said the same thing. She's like, why do you have so many scans of yourself? Why do you have so many prints of yourself? And I think it's really interesting in terms of this goes back to 3D scanning as like kind of a newer technology. It's for the same reason I feel like early photographs are typically of photographers, because it is a complicated process to scan somebody. And I gotta say, when you show somebody a 2D picture of themselves, sometimes they'll have some notes. And if you show somebody a 3D model of themselves, they are probably not going to allow you to publish it. So for me, when I want to test a scanner or something, I will usually have somebody scan me to test it, because when the 3D model comes out, I know what I look like, and I know what a 3D model of me looks like too. But if I ask somebody else and I say, do you want a 3D scan? There's a pretty good chance they're not going to be as enthusiastic about the 3D model. This was summed up for me really, really well by a company that was doing 3D scans as a service. And so this was actually in a shopping mall, and they had a ring, they had a photo booth set up where you'd stand in the center, and they would take a bunch of pictures with DSLR cameras, reconstruct it, and then 3D print a little color version of yourself, similar to Shrunk 3D, who was at 3D Printopia.
3D Printopia, yeah.
Very, very similar. And so I chatted with the owner of this shop, and I said, because he had a lot of models on display, and he mentioned their return rate was really high, like really high. People would get a model and they'd come back and they'd say, I don't look like this. And one of the things that he said was, it summed it up perfectly. People typically don't like themselves in 2D. They really hate themselves in 3D.
Ooh, wow.
And so you have this, like with 3D printing, especially in 3D modeling, you want to explore the technology, and you want to test a scanner, you want to test a color model, you want to find out like, hey, is this dude going to hold a pen? But it's complicated because there's like a social aspect as well. And so for me, I don't really ask to 3D scan people. I've 3D scanned a couple, but generally speaking, I don't really ask to scan people because most people, they're not in a big hurry to see a 3D model of themselves.
I never even thought, Go ahead, Becky.
No, it's just a very interesting insight. I don't know. I got myself scanned with a Kinect back in the day, but that was very inviting because the resolution wasn't so good. So I'm like, oh, it won't show any cellulite or any blemishes. Like, we'll do it now before they get too good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of it too, is you just sort of, there's this element of, if you understand that it's a 3D scan, it might come out weird. Some people are very sensitive to things like this. And so like one of the first 3D scans that I did, right? Like you remember, it's a photogrammetry, so it's a lot of pictures. So one photo I'm looking this way, the other photo I'm looking that way. And so in the 3D scan, my eyes are like doing this, right? And I don't care. I'm just going to print it. But I can absolutely see if I were to present that to somebody, here's your 3D scan, right? They probably wouldn't be thrilled.
Yeah, well, yeah, 3 eyes is hard to get past. Yeah, I could say that. I could agree with that. But let me ask you this, Andrew, what if, you know, all of us who are here, we're looking to kind of work with this collaborative technology of scanning and everything like that. What are your recommendations? How do we get started, and how do we start moving forward, and all those wonderful things like that?
Yeah, I would say the very first thing you want to do, just lower the expectations and let yourself explore, because 3D scanning, you are going, whatever your first scan is, you're probably not going to be happy. And and if you come into it, just like with a 3D printer, I think there's a little bit more leeway. I've seen a lot of people who have done like one 3D scan and then just given up, called it a day. It's tough. It's hard. It's like taking a picture of a mirror, right? When you're scanning something that's reflective, sometimes the camera can get confused. Is this a reflection? What am I looking at here? So lower your expectations, and then download an app like Polycam or Reality Capture. Those are both very good options that allow you to take a bunch of photos and stitch them into an object. And I'd recommend go outside and go find a mailbox, a fire hydrant, a tree, something big and slow moving on a nice overcast day where there's not a lot of directional light, because directional light, it's very tricky for a camera when the exposure can change so dramatically. The eyes are really good at being able to sort of filter and like normalize light, but it turns out a dark room and a bright light outside, very different levels of exposure. So take a nice overcast day, download an app like Polycam or Reality Capture, and go take a bunch of pictures of something, and then look at the 3D model, and then sort of work backwards from there, and then understand, okay, so what worked, what didn't work? Why am I 3D scanning? Am I trying to capture sub-millimeter accuracy on a piece of stamped sheet metal? Photogrammetry is
not going to happen.
And explore with it and understand that just like with 3D printing, your first one's going to be bad, and that's okay, because your second one's going to be better, and you're going to improve over time.
Okay, great. And so lower your expectations, find some low light, and then scan using one or two software programs, Polycam or Reality Capture, and see what you can make. Now, I'm trying to think of instances in which something like this, where something like this could kind of be almost like habitual, but I don't know. Like, do people is the Thanksgiving turkey that we've all rifled through, somehow is that a decent subject if you're inside? It's kind of glistening. It's got indoor light. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you also have to deal with the patience, right? Because you're gonna have a lot of people looking at it. Like, hold on, I need to scan this thing.
It's kind of cool when you take it out.
I might have a video for that. I have a video of my son when he was it was 5 years ago, and he's sitting right next to a plate of turkey on Thanksgiving Day, but my in-laws were still asleep, and he's crying like, I want turkey now.
Yeah, if you're gonna scan a turkey, I would recommend waiting until maybe take it out a little early and take some pictures before people filter in.
Before people come in.
In terms of developing a ritual, I'd say it's whatever is important to you. So somebody's asking a question about static objects and measurements. And this is a really good one to talk about 3D scanning, because this goes back to understanding those expectations. Right. I watched a video where Adam Savage kind of asked a question about how closely can you measure a coastline, talking about accurately reproducing something. And I think this is a good example of right here, when you say, scanning a static object to get measurements, that can be interpreted a couple different ways. The tolerance to a specific amount. Is this a general a magnitude? Generally speaking, photogrammetry will get you an object that is fairly accurate to scale. So you can scan something that is, a couple inches tall, and the part in Blender, when you export it and you look at it and compare it, it's going to be pretty close. There's going to be a couple of millimeters plus or minus. There might be some warping or distortion, but generally speaking, it's fairly accurate. Metrology grade scanners that use structured light will actually project a grid of light onto an object and then use multiple cameras to pick up distortion on that grid. And those are much, much more accurate, like micron precision levels. There's a scanner by a German company called GOM, and it measures down to about 5 microns. And I asked one of the engineers who was working there, what does 5 microns look like? Like, how can I visualize that? And he went, it's that. So like that was, you know, that level of accuracy exists if you need it and if you want to pay for it. If you are trying to scan a Thanksgiving turkey, less important.
I hear you. Okay. Yeah, you know, well, yeah, you know, if you're trying to scan something that's like an everyday object, to just trying to get yourself kind of what is the word? You know, get your feet wet type of thing. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm really trying to kind of work out. You know, as we're talking about this, you know, out loud type of thing. You know, I like the idea of scanning things in a museum. That really fascinates me a lot. And actually, one of the things that I thought about very deeply when a lot of the controversy was happening around monuments and stuff like that, as I was like, wow, well, I mean, you know, there's nothing wrong with scanning those monuments, and instead of people having to go to Richmond or Georgia or Florida or wherever they're set up now because they're so important, those places, that they could be, if they wanted to, they could be distributed throughout the entire planet. You know, I'm a little late on that one, but still, though, I thought to myself, you know, that'd be a decent solution. You don't have to take big, heavy pieces of metal and put them anywhere anymore if you don't want to.
Yeah, you're sort of just reproducing it as needed. So scan and then print, and then I think I remember hearing. I was actually living in Richmond when those monuments were. I'm actually not sure what happened to them, but there's talk of taking them down or adding like a contextual plaque that kind of explained this is the person, this is why they were important.
They're taken down.
Yeah, they did get taken down.
Yeah. Monument Avenue. I think Arthur Ashe is the only one that's left. I think.
There's a great, so for anybody who's not on, who doesn't live in Richmond, there's a great sculpture of a tennis player named Arthur Ashe in Richmond, Virginia. And it's notable for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a great monument to a fantastic tennis player. But number 2, if you look at it from below, there's a group of children who are defensively holding their hands up. Yeah. And there's a man holding a tennis racket like this. And the first time I saw it, I had to stop my car. I went out to look at it like, what is he doing? It was
does he have a book in the other hand?
Yeah, he's about to hit him with it. Like, it was a very strange sculpture. But yeah, that's Arthur Ashe, ASHE in Richmond, Virginia. So in terms of 3D scanning, I mean, honestly, museums are fantastic. One of my absolute favorite things in the world to scan is marble, especially marble. It's very even. Carrara marble, so Italian marble, it's very soft looking. It doesn't have a lot of reflectivity. It's a very even and clean material to scan, and it usually looks fantastic. Bronze is one of the worst things. I absolutely hate scanning it. I'll do it. I've done it a ton, because if you look at a bronze sculpture, especially in the daylight, the slightest indent is the blackest pixel possible. Like, it is like an endless night. It's just so dark. And then right next to it, the highlight is like the light will hurt your eyes from looking at it. And so bronze is just a real tough thing to start. And I got really lucky back to, first print success or first scan success. The first thing that I scanned was made of sandstone, which was perfect because it was it wasn't reflective. There was a sculpture called Man Carving His Own Destiny that was in Orlando, Florida. It was a Polish sculptor named Albin Polacek. And it was an awesome sculpture. It's a guy sort of chiseling himself out of a rock. Really cool. And I scanned it. I took a bunch of pictures with an iPad and stitched them back together. And I immediately was like, oh, this is so cool. This is such I took this scan home and printed it. And now I have it in my house, as a reminder, which was a really cool experience.
Great memento. I would agree with that. Yeah. Are there, I'll ask this one last question, then we're getting close to the end. And I'm sorry, Vicky, I'm also asking way too many questions. But there was an article that I read maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and they were talking about how the antiquities in Iraq, I think it was Iraq, were being stolen or they were being destroyed, right? And so there was a project, and I want to know if you'd heard about this project too. There was a project where they were trying to get a cache of all the photographs that anybody had ever taken of these antiquities, and trying to sew them together to make STLs that we could then reproduce. Do you remember hearing about that?
I do, and it's actually, I think it was Facebook. There was a company that was behind it that was actually they were sponsoring or organizing the event, and that's actually where I sort of developed that vocabulary of documentation versus preservation, because in all of the media and the press, it referred to preserving artifacts and preserving history. And I didn't feel that was the right word. I think that it didn't preserve anything, no more than an actual object deleted, but it did do an excellent job of documenting it, which I think that is also very important, and just as important, right? And it's just a difference of it's a technicality, but it really, something about seeing the headline, preserving something by scanning it, was sort of like, it's like, are you preserving your Thanksgiving turkey by taking a picture of it? Like, maybe not so much.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. The actual object for everybody to consume at a later date. I would say my response to that is that we don't interact with antiquities in the same way that we interact with the turkey. So our perceptions of the preserved object are exactly the same, whether it's genuinely the original thing or not.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's good. It's a fascinating topic, and it's
it is.
So going back to Michael Crichton, so going all the way back to the beginning here.
Full circle.
We're coming full circle. So in the book, in the book Timeline, they talk about this thing called a transcription error, which is when you take something and decompose it into data and then send it somewhere, sometimes things happen along the way, and a 0 turns into a 1. And so in the book, there is this concept of a transcription error being a series of malformed data that accumulate over the process of sending, receiving, sending, receiving. And I loved this idea. And in 2015, I used a MakerBot digitizer, which is an old MakerBot 3D scanner, a little turntable. And I took a 3D model and I scanned it and then printed it and then scanned it. And I kept going until it looked like a rock. And it was this to me, it was this very fascinating idea of, in theory, every time I scan something, the output should be the same as the input, right? Like, this is the whole point of scanning. But you would scan it and then you would print it and it would be just a little different. And then the scanner would pick up on that. And so I wound up with a model that like decomposed over time. And it was much in line with the book. It was this idea that we think that we have this figured out. And in reality, there's a bit of a learning curve. And I think we're still there in a lot of ways with 3D scanning.
Absolutely. No, there's we're just getting started.
Visual illustration of mutation and
it was fascinating. So so 3D scanning is something that I'm very optimistic for, because I feel like the barrier to entry is lowering very quickly, and especially as CAD gets easier to use. Something that we were talking about a little bit earlier was slicer software and CAD software are slowly starting to have a little bit of overlap, and you're able to do some basic manipulation. You can Boolean objects together or combine them. To me, like, the greatest leap in technology was when slicers started to be able to do planar cuts on models. Like, to me, that inspired a whole generation of new 3D modelers, because that was like an insurmountable problem in 2013 and prior. Was like, hey, I've got a 3D model, I want to cut it in half. Like, what do you do? Like you can't cut an STL in half in like SolidWorks 2013. Not going to happen. You can do it in Blender, but it's a crazy learning curve. It's really tough in the beginning, unless you have the book Learning Blender by Vicky Soma, which is an excellent read. How I learned a lot of Blender.
Excellent.
Significantly out of date at this time, but
the core Blender stuff doesn't age. It just the menu changes.
Hey, I do believe you're in the acknowledgments of that book too.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Yeah, again, you were one of my first 3D printing ambassadors.
Yeah, and so that was like, the ability to start making these mesh manipulations and slicer software became easier, enabled a lot of this growth where people were able to suddenly start like, hey, I want to model, but I want, I want name tags for my family. I want to add a different name on each one, right? I can just cut something and add the text and then stitch it together. And with 3D scanning, I think we're getting somewhere similar, where you can start to crop and paste and play around with 3D scans in a very intuitive way, which it's great.
I would agree.
Well, I will chime in real quick. Like, inspired by this episode, I did install Polycam on my phone, and maybe I stumbled in. The first thing I scanned was wood, and it was like just a record button. I wasn't individually taking pictures. I just did a record and like went around it. I had to do a little bit of cleanup, and I guess, wait, hold on. It's a little doggy that my great uncle actually carved that I grabbed after his funeral from his wood shop. And so I did pull it into Blender to clean up some artifacts in between his legs or whatnot. But nowadays, you could totally do that in Fruitless Icer or Bamboo Studio or whatnot by, just adding your negative modifiers if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I guess I might as well show the final thing here. So, we often, when we do How Would You Slice That, we first envisioned the show, I was envisioning we're always going to be talking about settings, or we're going to be talking about strategies. But this time, the How Would You Slice That answer, my answer to that question is with a little lump in my throat, because this was originally carved by my great uncle. I was quite close with him. We hiked even when he was in his 90s and everything like that. And so I scanned it and I'm painting it in Bamboo Studio. And it didn't really hit me until I was starting to print that I'm co-designing with a deceased loved one. And what sorcery is this? That my great uncle and I are able to collaborate on this piece, on this print. Anyways, first 3D scan, and I have a few more carvings of my great uncles that I can go ahead and try and learn a little more. But yeah, that polycam, super easy. I don't know. I didn't even read any instructions. I just kind of fumbled my way through it.
Yeah, it looks incredible, and it's also there's a ton of obviously very it's a very emotional experience to see something like this and realize that like you said, you're collaborating. This is a project that it's almost like you're picking it up and saying, okay, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to experiment a little bit. You're very lucky your great uncle wasn't a glass blower, because you would have had a pretty steep challenge right off the bat. A piece of unpainted wood is about as lucky as you can get, really, for 3D scanning.
It's pure luck. I'm like, what? I need to scan something. Oh, I'll just grab this.
Yeah, and it looks fantastic. It really does. And this is a perfect example of this is now, you can iterate on this, you can change this, you can make all these modifications digitally, you can document it, right? And then you don't have to worry about damaging the original. I have my Nana, my grandmother, had a tiny ceramic cat that it's she had in our house. I remember it from growing up, and it's mine now, and I'm terrified of breaking it. And so one of the first things I did when it became mine was to scan it and then print an exact replica of it, which is the one that I keep out to help me with my anxiety when I look at it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's a fantastic use.
Yeah. So I think that I feel very strongly that 3D scanning is, is an excellent counterpart to 3D printing. I think that the barrier to entry historically has been software. It's been a very difficult and time-consuming process to learn all of these scanning apps. The cost of a scanner was prohibitive. And I think we're really at this perfect spot where the software is intuitive, the apps are inexpensive, if not free. If you use a Mac, you actually have, I think it's called Object Capture. There's a command line program you can use to stitch together photos that's just built into your software. You just have it. And it's similar to Polycam, right? And so it's never been easier to make this stuff. And it's never been easier to experiment and to explore with it.
Wonderful.
As we're coming to the end here, I'm going to throw a link to your Andrew Sink XYZ site up into the chat. And are there any other little places you'd like people to find you? Your YouTube, how many views do you have now?
I've been doing YouTube. Every time I look at it, I forget how long I've been doing it for. I've been doing YouTube for about 10 years, maybe somewhere around there. And I think it's 10 million views, which compared to a lot of big channels, it's very small. But to me, it's 10 million seems like a astronomically large number. And it's funny because you can see as you go back in time, as I go back in time for my YouTube channel, I get to see what my biggest problems were, because my YouTube channel started as a way for me to explain the same thing over and over again. Back to Lawrence, what you were saying about the color, changing colors. For a long time, that was a common question. How do I get two colors in a print? And so I was like, oh, I'll just make a little YouTube video showing how I, snip the filament as it's going in and change the color, or program in the gCode pause command and stuff. And so the YouTube channel started as a way for me to explain this without having to repeat myself a million times. and kind of get started. And then from there, it turned into more of like, I want to dive deeper. I want to make a printer that prints peanut butter and jelly. I want to make a
Bojangles biscuit,
or a 3D scanned Bojangles biscuit, right? Or I made an 8-minute video that's like, what actually is an STL file? Like if you open it in a text editor, what's inside an STL file? And it's become this really fun way for me to engage with the 3D printing community and sort of share what I'm thinking, what I'm working on. And it's always been a very low stress and fun hobby. So you can find me on YouTube. It's Andrew Sink. It's the name of the channel. Should probably name it at some point. And then andrewsink.xyz is sort of like my little list of all my projects. One that I worked on, and I was actually talking to my friend Uncle Jesse, who also has a YouTube channel, and I realized
works with you on the resin labs, right?
And he worked, and he created the idea of resin labs, of creating a time lapse for a resin 3D printer. We worked on that project together, but we were talking recently, and I realized I'd worked on a project that I got all the way up to the end and published it, and forgot to actually talk about. But if you go to shout3d.xyz, I used ChatGPT to help me with a website where you can upload a 3D model and then yell at it, and it will distort the model. And Chuck Hellebuyck did a really cool video on a previous version I had done where you had a slider to twist the model. And then I was like, well, you know what? The slider is fun, but I'll bet I could make it voice activated. And so I used ChatGPT to help me out with the JavaScript library for processing audio, because that's not something I had done before. And ChatGPT walked me through it. And so now there's a website, shout3d.xyz, where you can just upload a 3D model and yell at it and twist it up.
Wow.
So that will eventually go to the YouTube channel.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate you coming on here. I think when I made a spreadsheet of potential guests, like you're like at the top of the list, because you're just like, you welcomed me in the community. So I definitely wanted you up on the live stream. Everybody, if you're not familiar with the show, How Would You Slice That is live on Tuesdays that are prime numbers. We have 3 prime numbers in December. And so our next episode is going to be in 2 weeks from now on December 17th. We really appreciate all the community engagement. If you're interested in appearing on a How Would You Slice That episode, you could go to howwouldyouslicethat.com and fill out a little form to be a guest. Or if there's a particular model or something tricky that you'd like us to discuss, you can submit that as well. This is always the hardest part of the show, which is articulating my gratitude to Lawrence for doing this, my gratitude for Andrew for giving us 1 hour and 17 minutes of his time, and also everybody in the chat. It was very lively today. Thank you so much for. I'm looking at the chat when I should be looking at the screen. Thank you, everybody who spent their Tuesday night with us and asked questions and commented and made some jokes. I couldn't acknowledge them all, but there's some that were that brought me very losing my English, but brought me a lot of enjoyment in my head. Yes. So everybody, hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks. Andrew, Lawrence, do you have any parting words?
I would love to point out that it is very funny to me that you mentioned being welcomed in the community, because for those who aren't aware, Vicky is a board member of 3D Printopia, formerly Earth, which is one of the largest event, like 3D printing. It's like, to me, it is the spiritual successor to all the maker fairs, the one corner where the 3D printers were all pushed. It's this awesome community event where people go and check out what's new in 3D printing. And at 3D Printopia, I went this year for the first time, and I was blown away with how many people I met there who said this was their first 3D printing event they had been to. So wow. It's Vicky, you are now welcoming in like the next wave of the community, and hopefully one of them will have you on their podcast in a couple of years.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But I like working the registration desk, and we always talk about like, oh, we're gonna have enough volunteers, you don't have to work the registration desk, but I like doing it. I like seeing the people come in and making sure that they feel welcome.
You do a great job of it, and we really appreciate it too. So yeah.
And Lawrence is one of our registration volunteers too.
Yeah, it's lots of fun to see the stuff people are bringing in, and making connections and seeing stuff that, especially the manufacturing side of it, the product side of it. Some of those things that I've done research on and I can actually hold it in my hand. That's really where I like to experience 3D Printopia. So
Well, hopefully we can entice you back next year, Andrew.
I'm in.
Right. Oh, also, we have a side project. Someone in the chat suggests that we 3D scan No Effects, the band.
I would be shocked to find out they haven't done that already, but I think that would be a great idea.
Okay, and we will be documenting. Fat Mike has changed his looks over the years, so we'll be documenting what he looks like right now. All right. Anyways, we were saying goodbye before my No Effects tangent, but everybody, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your evening or day, and hopefully we'll see some of you in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. Have a good one.